Sometimes we see very cool panels that we really want to color, but we lose motivation once we see the very intricate background the panel has. Don't let this discourage you. I will show you how to color these type of backgrounds in a quick way that will save you a ton of time. I am Grecia, mainly known for my One Piece manga fan colorings. Make sure to subscribe for more tutorials like this. So let's get started with this video that was highly requested on how to color complex backgrounds. This video contains manga panels from One Piece chapters 1050 all the way to 1062, so if you're not caught up, there might be spoilers. This one is one of the most complicated backgrounds I have colored up to date. When they reach Egghead Island, they encounter this landscape with tall robots and holographic creatures, towers with what seems like glass bubbles, and so much more going on. There are so many details that it seems overwhelming to even attempt to color this. My advice is to set first the general background color you want to have, so you can have a base for the colors for each element. I am giving this panel a blue-green background since I know I will be using a lot of gray and metallic tones for the content in the background. It creates a good contrast to make it look vibrant and colorful. I try to make gray in light tones instead of a solid color, to give them more depth and movement. I then add the base colors for the elements in the image. You don't need to go too crazy with the details, as we will make them pop up at the end. For now, using one base color and one single shade that creates a nice contrast will be more than enough. You can add other smaller details with different colors so it doesn't look too dull and monochromatic. You may feel a little disappointed at how boring and dull it looks right now, after adding all of those colors. Don't worry, I have a trick to make the coloring look 100 times better. You will create a new layer on top of all of your layers and select the blending mode Add. I have a full video on how to use that technique if you want to check that out for a better explanation. Use a very thin brush, typically the brush you use for the line art, and start tracing bright outlines on every single element in the panel. You don't even have to switch colors. I am using the same bright cyan color for every single element, including the floor, each character, and all of the elements on the background. This really makes it look three-dimensional. Then, with that same color, you can use a soft brush in a bigger size and add some glow on the metallic elements to add more shine and blend it together. Another cool thing I decided to do here that completely changed the coloring was to add light reflections on a completely different color. I noticed that there was a traffic light, so I colored the red light on and decided to add red reflections on some parts of the background. This inspired me to add more red lights along other parts of the background. The contrast of bright blue light versus rough red light made this coloring in particular stand out a lot more. Sometimes just adding this highlight technique makes a coloring look a million times better. Just be mindful of how many highlights you use and how precise your strokes are. You don't want it to look like a foggy cloud of glow or a very rough white outline. You have to play around with the reflection of the light in different angles and intensities. Another great example of complex backgrounds was during the Wano arc. There are so many panels with the city on the background that it made it more tedious to color. Fortunately, the highlight technique worked wonders here. We have this panel of Momonosuke's first appearance in front of the Wano citizens as an adult dragon, in chapter 1050. In panels like this, Oda tends to draw incomplete structures behind the characters, to highlight them and separate the background line art and the character line art. While this looks clean in a black and white version, when we try to color these panels, it creates a problem. The smart and fast path is to just create an aura of color behind them to blend in the background with the character. However, I like to finish the line art on the background and make a solid background, where you can see every single detail. But you can totally skip this part if you don't feel comfortable drawing the missing parts. For this background, I had two layers to work with, one for the structures and elements on the front, and another for the sky on the back, so I could play around with different tones for the sky. This also helped me to add a layer in between the sky background and the city background, where I selected the blending mode Add and created a bright aura behind the city, as if the sky was beginning to rise from the break of dawn, illuminating the city from behind. If I had not created this in-between layer, the highlights would have ended up merging over the city, and it would have looked unnaturally lit. To shade the city, I did not bother to go color by color in a darker shade. Instead, with a soft brush, I simply grabbed a black color and lowered the opacity of the brush. This allowed me to create shadows over the city in a much faster way. Or you can also use my shading method explained in one of my videos where I simplify shading in one single step. Again, once you have your flat colors, adding the highlights will make the background stand out a lot more. To choose the highlights here, I saw the scene involve lamps lit with fire spread across the city, as well as the dawn breaking behind. So the highlights would be a warm orange tone that would reflect on the walls and roofs of the city. I use this exact same technique for a different panel in chapter 1055, where I start with the base colors for the sky and buildings, using flat colors and then just a black color with lower opacity to create quick shadows for depth. The highlights will always finish bringing everything together, so you don't have to spend so much time on details in the elements for the background, as this trick will do the job. There's also other manga panels where the background is the focus itself as opposed to close-up of characters. In this case, again from chapter 1055, it's the Ponyglyph. So, to make panels like this stand out, you need to focus on creating cool special effects. Here, you definitely need to play around with different texturized brushes to be able to give life to this scene, such as stains and moss on the Ponyglyph as well as the wood around it. You have to understand the context of the scene in order to give it a proper coloring. This is supposed to be very old, abandoned, and not well preserved, as well as deep underground. Therefore, you should not color these in a clean, bright background. That being said, the highlights I plan on giving here will be a cold blue color, as opposed to a bright warm orange. To enhance the theme I just described, I am adding some mist and fog creeping across the area they're in, as well as deepening the shadows, so it looks darker and gloomier. This is one of my favorite colorings that I've made. It's very different to what I'm used to coloring. These exact same rules apply to a more recent chapter in Egghead Island, where we encounter an ancient robot. It is a similar panel composition as the one with the Ponyglyph, where we have very small characters looking at a large element. Therefore, the coloring should be texturized and have special effects. Here, I did multiple colorizations to resemble the rusty effect of the badly preserved robot, as well as adding moss. Since it looks very dark and gloomy, adding the highlight effects here is crucial, especially since, in this panel, we do have an actual indication that there is a light beaming from the top left corner of the panel, indicated by those diagonal lines reaching towards the giant robot. Since we have both rusty brown colors and the atmosphere is bluish green, I mixed both highlights just as we did on the very first example of Egghead Island with the blue and red highlights. I then added layers of the beams of light with a big round brush and used the Gaussian blur effect to smoothen them out. These beams are under the blending mode add, and just play with the opacity depending on how bright you want them to be. As you can see, it can be quite challenging when you don't have nice close-up of characters to work with, right? Backgrounds tend to be more detailed and therefore more difficult to work with, but there's always tricks that you can try to simplify your work and make it clean without spending so many hours on it. I am all about working as quick as possible, especially with the chapter coloring since I have a tight deadline. I hope this overview and explanation help you understand better the process behind coloring complex backgrounds. It can be simple with the right tricks, so make sure to check out my other tutorials on how to work with highlights and how to do a simple and quick shading. Thank you so much for watching.